In every divorce, there's conflict. If there's every marriage, there's conflict. But if you get a divorce, there's going to be some level of conflict. Most of the time, the parties are able to be relatively amicable, to work out their differences and get divorced in a relatively painless or moderately painless fashion. However, there are cases that are more what we consider to be high conflict cases. In those cases, if you're dealing with one of the parties has some toxic personality traits, sometimes they may even be what psychologists list in the cluster B personalities of narcissistic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder, things like that that really create for a difficult divorce. What are some of the traits that you'll see in those type of cases? There's going to be lots of anger. There's going to be lots of accusations, normally a lot of false accusations. There's going to be an inability for the other party to acknowledge their faults. Unfortunately, a lot of times there's going to be domestic violence. There also are going to be times where there are false accusations of domestic violence. That's actually very common in high conflict divorces. You're dealing with a divorce where the other party will say or do anything to try to hurt you. And a lot of times it feels as though for them, they're willing to hurt themselves and make the process more difficult as long as they can hurt you more in the process. False accusations are often difficult to deal with. It's hard to disprove a negative. Sometimes if their stories are not well concocted, we can pick apart their false accusations and cross-examination. However, a lot of times we need to do much more thorough work. And the more documentation we have to show what's really going on, the better. So if you're dealing with somebody who makes a lot of false accusations, it's really a good idea to document yourself as much as you can, to confirm things with text messages. Bring up things that the other person said and bring it up in a text message so that way there's now a memorialization of what the truth is in writing. It's also very important, though, if somebody's doing that to you, that if they are making false accusations in writing to you, that you respond to that right away and address that issue. Because as a husband, if your wife sends you a text message and says that you hit me and you never hit your wife, you better respond and say, I've never hit you, because if you don't, the court's going to look at that as with some degree of evidence that any person who was accused of that would have responded and said that they don't. So it's normally a good idea that you're going to want to respond to that. First of all, if you are dealing with this type of person, you need to separate. You need to be away from that person. If you can't trust that they aren't going to make false accusations about you, you need to be as far away from that person as you possibly can be. So first and foremost, do that. If you're in a situation because of the kids or because of a financial situation where you're not able to do that at the present moment, then you need to protect yourself. There are all sorts of devices these days that can record all conversations. And under Texas, we're what is considered a one-party state. You only need to have one party's consent to record their voice. The other person doesn't have to know that you're recording them. Only you have to know that you're recording them. To just have the recording going on all the time, or anytime you're having an interaction with them, to show, hey, whatever they're going to say about you isn't true, oftentimes that's a good way to protect you. Now, one word of caution about that. When I say to have a recording, I mean to do that. Don't do that, obviously, to just have a recording going. One of the things that I hate seeing is particularly when people do this around kids, is that they start arguing in front of the kids and one person takes out the phone and starts recording the other person. That's going to increase tensions. It's also just going to create a bad environment for the kiddos. But I do think it is a good idea to secretively, to where the other side doesn't necessarily know about it, to be recording them on your phone or other device. If you're going through a divorce and a high conflict divorce, particularly if you're dealing with a spouse who has narcissistic personality disorder or borderline personality disorder, it is going to be very emotionally draining on you. You're not a perfect person. You're not going to respond perfectly. And it's very important for your mental health that you get the mental health that you need for that. We try to help our clients at the Bayley Law Firm deal with the emotional stress that comes with a divorce like this, but We're not therapists. You need to have a therapist. There's no shame in seeing a therapist to help get you through this part of the process. You should be mindful of what you tell a therapist is discoverable in court, meaning the other side could hear that. But a lot of times, if you advise the therapist ahead of time that you're going through the divorce and that it's a possibility about their notes being subpoenaed, they often will be very careful as to how they take their notes. But your mental health is very important. How you behave in this case is of critical importance. Your mental health is what's going to help drive you in behaving the correct way so you get the best result that you can get. And the only way that you're going to get that is if you pay appropriate attention to your mental health. So whether you need to see a psychiatrist or a psychologist, I'd encourage anybody going through a really stressful situation to do that. So a lot of times people ask, should we fight all the way or should we try to just work out a compromise? If I can get 95% of what I want versus gambling for that extra 5%, I am always of the belief it's better to get a guaranteed 95% of what you want versus that chance to get a little bit more in court from the judge. Because I've seen too many times in court where judges don't do what they're expected to do. How often, sometimes, and more often than not, in a high conflict divorce, where you're just dealing with a very difficult person, it's going to be very hard to get to what will be a reasonable settlement. To get your maximal day in court in a settlement, you should be trying to be mindful of the fact that even the best cases sometimes lose in court. Sometimes the judge just has an off day. Sometimes just various factors happen. So you should be mindful of that. Oftentimes with these type of cases, you're going to have a hard time getting the opposing spouse to be reasonable enough to offer something that's worth settling. So whether or not we settle or take the case to trial, it's going to depend upon a lot of factors. Going to trial is very expensive. Settling outside of court is going to cost less money. That's going to be a factor involved. Again, the uncertainty of court is a factor involved versus the guarantee that you're going to get something. Every case is going to be unique and every situation is going to be unique. It's something that we would work with you with and spend a lot of time assessing to give you the best advice and help guide you to the right decision as to whether or not this is a case that you should try to settle or a case that you should take to trial in front of a judge. If you do find yourself in one of these, what we call high conflict divorces, we at the Bayley Law Firm do not shy away from high conflict divorces. We will absolutely take your case. We are happy to help walk you through this process. Just give us a call for a consultation. Thank you.